To the NASUWT NQT seminar this morning, and an exciting start to the day's events. We have four, I'm forgetting Gareth there, four esteemed colleagues here to speak to us about various matters that might affect NQTs in schools. And rather than myself introduce them, I'm going to give each of our panelists an opportunity to introduce themselves and say a few opening remarks. So I'm going to start with Alison.
Thank you. So I'm Alison Peacock. I lead the Chartered College of Teaching, having spent the whole of my career working as a teacher in both secondary and primary. I'm very pleased to be here today because I know that the first year of anybody's teaching career is one that you never forget. And I'm guessing that the conversation will also focus around much of the challenge presented to us by teaching in a global pandemic. So looking forward to engaging with your questions and thinking about this, but most of all to say it's the most brilliant job being a teacher, and thank you for being here on a Saturday morning. Thank you very much, Phil.
Thanks, Alison. And next I'll pass over to Becky.
Hello everyone, I'm Becky Francis. I'm Chief Executive of the Education Endowment Foundation, an organisation that is focused on realising the life chances of all young people, but particularly the disadvantaged. And in order to do that, mobilising the best, most rigorous research evidence to support professionals like yourselves to adopt the best practices in teaching to support those young people. And before that, I was director of the Institute of Education at UCL, the biggest teacher trainer in the country. And so I'm sure many of you trained with me in my prior job. And I look forward to talking to you all today.
Thank you very much, Becky. And next, I'll pass over to Kate.
Morning, everybody. Really nice to see you all. I'm Kate Green. I've been Labour's Shadow Secretary of State for Education since June. And if Alison says that teaching is a fantastic job, which it is, I've got to say in the Labour Party, being the Shadow Secretary of State for Education is the most fantastic job. And it's been a really, really busy few months, very much dominated by the COVID pressures that you will no doubt want to talk to us about this morning. But really what I am picking up as I think about those COVID pressures is how they are being basically a sort of windsock, if you like, for the kind of fundamental challenges that we face in schools and in our education system, and really pointing the way to some of the strategic questions that Labour is thinking about as we start to consider the kind of policy programme we would like to be running in government. So I'm very, very keen to hear what your early experiences as newly qualified teachers have been and your suggestions for how you would like things to develop in the future.
Thank you very much, Kate. And finally, Gareth.
Hello, everyone. My name is Gareth Young, and I am the Deputy General Secretary of the NASUWT. I started the job at the 2nd of November. That's right. I think it was 2nd November. And for the last 11 years, I've worked for the NASUWT in a couple of different roles. But before that, I was a history teacher in schools up and down the country. I moved around quite a lot. Maybe there's a problem there for me there in terms of being a teacher. I don't know. What I think the important thing about this is for us to sort of work together as a community to talk about some of the issues that are facing you today, to understand what they are, and then hopefully the union can help to react to those along with other colleagues here thinking about the issues that are mentioned.
Okay, thank you very much, Gareth. We've received loads and loads of questions for today's panelists from NQTs. A lot of them were very specific to individuals. Just to make sure colleagues are aware, on the chat box today, we will frequently be putting the contact details for the NASUWT that people can contact if they've got specific individual questions that just pertain to themselves, really. That'll be cropping up regularly. And obviously we will respond to any specific questions individuals have. What we've tried to do is take the themes of the questions and broaden them out. And for each of the questions, I'm going to give the panelists an opportunity to make comments and respond. So why don't we make a start? The first question is very much in COVID context, and it is, to what extent should NQTs be expected to adapt to challenges facing schools right now? And do answer that in the context that teachers qualifying in 2020 do not receive the same opportunities and support of previous cohorts of NQTs. Kate.
Well, it's such a good question. And of course, everybody in every walk of life is facing COVID challenges that none of us expected to be living with even just 8 or 9 months ago. But it's really important, I think, that we do ensure that newly qualified teachers are given as much support and opportunity to develop your professional practice, your professional skill as we possibly can. And obviously that's important for you as individuals, as newly qualified teachers. But actually, I'm very, very concerned that in this COVID crisis, we can all see that it's children's learning and children's experience in school that is being really harshly affected. And you are key to mitigating, to ameliorating some of the effects that those children are experiencing, not just immediately in this COVID crisis, but there will be long tail effects for some of those children, both in terms of their learning and in terms of their socio-emotional development. And so investing as much as possible now in the support that you need to develop your professional skill and practice and build your abilities and competencies as teachers is vitally, vitally important, not just for your own career futures, but for those children and young people, the children and young people you're educating today in the middle of the crisis, and as we come out of the crisis, the continued need that they will have for top quality teaching support. So I think this is a real challenge. You know, school leaders are really struggling. I spoke to a group in my own constituency yesterday, and they were very, very pressed and stretched. But I would say that they value the new qualified teachers in their staff rooms. They've told me that, how important it is for them to have the vigor and the fresh ideas that you bring. They want to offer that support to you in a very, very difficult context. But I do think we have to make a priority of investing in you at this early stage in your career, because we'll get the biggest payback, frankly, to be a bit self-interested about it for a moment. We'll get the biggest payback by investing in the newly qualified teachers. And that's, I think, a really challenging balance. And I'd be very interested to hear people's ideas on how best we can achieve that when schools are grappling with such enormous pressures as they are right now.
Thank you, Kate. Alison?
Thank you. So firstly, if I can just say, well done for being a newly qualified teacher, because the profession absolutely needs you. And of course, this year is like no other year. I think probably every year that every teacher, every experiences in when they first start is one that stays in your memory, because everything's new. And so, yes, of course, we've got the kind of COVID overlay on everything. But the most important thing is that you look after yourself and that you seek to find the support. If you're not getting it from your school in the way that you might have hoped, that you seek to find support elsewhere, because you do need support to be the best teacher you can be in this first year. So this is why at the Chartered College, we've got the Early Career Hub. We've developed it especially for you. It's full of videos, links to articles written by teachers, blogs, lots and lots of advice, all organised around the new Early Career Framework priorities. So we really would suggest that that's somewhere you might want to go. If you're not a member, it's only a very small amount, it's £1.88 a month. But many, many NQTs, many of you will be members already. I also suggest that you make sure that you have contacts with your colleagues in school, and you maybe, talk to them on WhatsApp at the end of the day. You can't necessarily see them in the staff room in the way that you would have done previously. But a message to someone saying, could you just give me some advice about this? As long as it's not constant, as long as it's not every day, people like to be asked for help. People like to feel that they have expertise to offer. And actually, the other thing to say is, you have to kind of get rid of it in your mind that you've got to be the perfect teacher, because there is no such thing. All of us constantly who've worked in education for many, many years know that the job is never done, and that you never have the perfect day, and you're never ever going to leave at the end of the day and say, great, that was it. Every child spoken to, every display perfect, every book marked. That's never going to happen. So get over that aspiration and be kind to yourself. And as I say, ask for help where you need it, because we all need help at the moment. And as I say, people like to feel that they are able to offer some advice.
Thanks, Alison. Becky?
Well, that's such lovely advice, and such supportive and wise advice from Alison. I'm not sure if I can top that. I think I would just really extend it. I can only imagine the sort of doubly daunting experience for NQTs this year. Everything Alison said about your first year in any case, and then with the pandemic on top of that, complicating everything, changing everything from what you'd expected, reducing resources and time that your colleagues have got to give you the attention you need, and so on. So you have my greatest sympathies, but of course, as both Kate and Alison says, your presence and your support for the kids has never been more important either. And I think that I'd just build on what Alison was saying about drawing on the resources that you have in the wider sector at this time. Both the Chartered College and my organisation, the Education Endowment Foundation, have been closely engaged with the early career framework that we've supported. This is very much focused on bringing teaching into line with other great professions like law and medicine, ensuring that it's a learning profession that continues learning and continues really grounding that support for NQTs at the start of their work. But of course, again, the pandemic has complicated all of those plans. We have resources, and Alison's mentioned those at the Chartered College. Do draw on those that exist in the wider sector. The Education Endowment Foundation, as well as the resources that we have on evidence-based practice and that you can download freely available on our website. We have a series of guidance reports focusing on all sorts of different educational areas and practices, but including those to support your practice during the pandemic. So, for example, a rapid evidence review on remote learning provision and so forth, and so on. We also have 40 research schools across the country. So there's bound to be one fairly near you, hopefully next door. And they are rolling out CPD built around our evidence-based resources. So again, that would be another resource that you could get in touch with to help you out at this time.
Thanks, Becky. Gareth, would you like to add to the comments?
Absolutely. I mean, I think one of the things you said was to what extent shall NQTs be expected to adapt? And of course, they've just had to, haven't they? I mean, we know that that's the case. We know that you're there now every day doing what you need to do in order to deliver for the students, and you're doing a fantastic job. And you must remember that. I mean, as Alison said, you know, a lot of the issues I think that NQTs face in any year are to do with the fact that they've got impossibly sometimes high standards for themselves. And it's important to have high standards, of course it is, but it's also important to recognise that the most important thing is to look after yourself, to get through the day, to make sure that you're delivering the next day, that you can't always deliver perfection every day, and crucially, that you're not on your own. Now, usually in any other year, you would have a network of teachers around you that you would be able to talk to. You'd be able to go to the staff room, all of those kind of things. Some of those things may not be there this year. So never has the union been more important in terms of somewhere, a network where you can talk to other people, where you can get involved, where you can see the resources. And we've heard about some of the other networks as well that are out there. But the union is really key in terms of helping you to have conversations with people at all different stages of their lives, almost, if you like, as a sort of virtual staff room in the making across the country. That's kind of the way we might see it there, that opportunity for you to discuss all the issues that you might have, to say, well, is this really right? Is this the thing that I should be doing? Is this okay? And I know that way back when I was at NQT, I'd be asking questions of my colleagues about, should I really have to do all of that? And they say, well, of course not. You just need to, do this in order to deliver. And I think sometimes those are some of the questions that NQTs will ask. So the most important thing about all of this is to recognize that you're not on your own. It may feel like that sometimes, particularly in the evenings when you're trying to get that resource and you're thinking, oh my God, I don't know how I'm going to plan for this session, where you may be worried about the behavior management of a particular group, but you're not on your own. There are organizations to turn to, but crucially, there's the union to turn to as well.
Thanks, Gareth. I think the next question's sort of been covered, but I'm going to ask it because I think it's really important. And the cornerstone of the NQT year is their relationship with their mentor, who is obviously a more experienced practitioner. The question's really asking, currently, because of the demands and pressures and workload issues surrounding COVID-19 in schools, that relationship can be strained. Have the panelists got any advice to the NQT in the context of that relationship, but also to the mentor in context of that relationship in school? I'm going to start with Becky.
Thanks, Phil. I mean, I think this just builds on the last set of points, really. I mean, this is about individual contexts for schools within the pandemic, and of course, sort of individual situations, whether it's about relationships, whether it's about, staff shortages due to illness and so forth, all of those challenges at the present time, which as I've said already, I think would be massively exacerbated, I can only imagine. But I think that there is a role here, perhaps actually for the union, in highlighting the need to remind, whether it's more experienced teachers or to liaise with the head teacher associations, to be reminding head teachers of the need for care, particularly in these circumstances, to ensure that that support is being realised, and to check in on those mentoring relationships. And if the mentoring relationships aren't proving effective for the NQT mentee, for whatever reason, finding alternatives. That really does seem important, and something that I think the union is well placed to help with.
Thanks, Becky. Alison, anything to add to that?
Just to say, as an NQT, you are entitled to support from your mentor. And I completely agree with Becky. If for any reason that isn't working, then probably that's something that the NASUWT can help with. But before going to your union, obviously, talking within your school to try and understand what the barriers may be. It may be, for example, that your mentor is off sick at the moment. That's completely and utterly likely, given the way that things are going. But one would hope that within school, there is a community where everybody is trying to support each other. And also, just to say, I know you have to have your standards signed off during this year, so that's really important. But that general sense of being part of a team, as an NQT, I think you must be careful not to sort of look at yourself in a kind of deficit way and think, well, I'm the new person, I probably don't know anything. Actually, you might be the one that has more energy than anybody else on the whole staff. You might have some responsibility just to kind of keep everybody buoyant. So I think it goes two ways. But obviously, if that relationship isn't working for whatever reason and you need it to, then please do seek advice.
Thank you, Alison. Have you anything to add to that, Kate?
I was really going to say what Alison has just said. It's a two-way relationship, an adult to adult relationship, and you have a real status in that relationship, not just something that you're going to take from your mentor, but something that you will give, not to the mentoring relationship, and your mentor will benefit too. I mean, it's you know, because you're teachers, and the nature of the teaching profession is that you're mentoring your students. So you will understand both ends of that relationship. And I think it's absolutely right that you don't think of yourself as some sort of amateur or novice. You know, you're not a baby teacher, you're a teacher. And so I think, you know, obviously it's going to be a respectful relationship between two professional equals. And I think that's, you know, something that your school leaders and your mentor and everyone around you will want to support. So I think be confident in the relationship, and if it's not working, as Becky and Alison have said, of course you need to say so. But people will want that relationship to work, because it's key to ensuring that everybody teaching in the school is teaching to the very best of their potential and working together as a team.
Thank you, Kate. Gareth.
Yeah, I mean, just picking up on what Kate has said, I mean, this notion of a professional, that's really, really important. And I think it is critical as well to think that, you know, I was an NQT mentor for a while. It was one of the things that I enjoyed most about being a teacher. And so if there is a point at which perhaps the mentors may not know that they need, you know, that the conversations aren't going the way they are. So it is really important you pick up with the mentor how things are going. Maybe even look for new ways of communicating. Maybe part of the problem is the fact that there isn't the staff room or there aren't the opportunities there. So you could suggest how you might have different forms of communication through WhatsApp or other moves there. And then that takes us on to the wider point that colleagues have mentioned before about how, you know, remember the fact that you're coming into this with something new. You've got new ideas, and this is a new context. So therefore, your ideas are really, really important here, because you may not think, well, how can we do things differently when other colleagues may not really be able to yet adapt to that sort of, if you like, almost paradigm shift there. So for you, you can sort of really come out with great new ideas, new thinking about how things can be done, and that could really develop the school for the future.
Thank you, Gareth. I think the challenges that COVID-19 are presenting schools are well rehearsed and well documented, and we're living them on a daily basis. But I think the next question might be quite challenging to our panelists, to be honest. Are there any opportunities that the current situation is giving for NQTs that have just started out on their career as teachers? And I'm going to start with Alison with this one.
Thanks for that. I'm always somebody who wants to look for the good in things and to try and find positives. Now, one of the things that I think has happened over the last number of months is that teachers have developed closer relationships with families. And I think that whether you work in primary or secondary, understanding the context from which the young people that you teach come from is really vital. It's really helpful to your teaching. So where relationships have been strengthened between school and home, that is an absolute positive. And I think it's really important that you seek to build on that. Now, one of the things that's most challenging quite often from being an NQT, especially if you're straight from university, is that notion of the first parents' evening, or when parents come and see you for the first time, and maybe they're a little bit older than you are, and maybe they look like they're a lot wiser than you are, and it feels quite intimidating. I think the fact is, the more that you know the children that you teach, the more that you are really trying to build relationships with those youngsters. When they go home, they will talk about you, and I'm afraid they will. And in fact, the primary children will act you out. They'll impersonate you and pretend to be you, and so on. So the parents will know that version of you. The more that you've got a good relationship with those families, and that you can show them that you are authentically knowledgeable about the most important people in their lives, because for parents, your children are the most important things. They are your future. So I think anything that builds that better relationship between home and school has to be celebrated. So that's just that's the first thing that came into my mind. But I hope that's helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Alison. I'm going to put Gareth on the spot with this one now.
Dear me, that's terrible, isn't it? So, I mean, there's a couple of opportunities there. I mean, first of all, I've already spoken a little bit about some of the new technologies that are being used. I'm not necessarily talking about remote learning or things like that. It's more just the opportunities to use other tools to communicate with each other, to sort of create networks, to get involved, which I think are really useful. But the other opportunity really is something that is happening in lots of schools, not all schools, unfortunately, but in lots of schools, they're really thinking hard about, well, what are the things that we need to do in order to get through? And what are the things that we've been doing before that we didn't really need to do? And that actually is a really important thing. If we can use this as an opportunity to refocus on what matters, which is the teaching and learning of pupils, and not do some of the other things that we used to do just because they were things that maybe we're doing them for Ofsted or for league tables, or just because they were things we've always done. Well, that will be really useful. And I think NQTs, again, have a really important role to play there, because of course they won't have done all those other things before. So, you know, it is important as an NQT, not all the time, not every day, but to sometimes say, well, why do we do these things this way? I think that is a really important reflection. I think that new colleagues coming in, asking those kind of questions, sometimes allows other people to reflect. I know that even within the union, in terms of staff, when we have new staff in and they say, well, why do you do things like this? And you sort of scratch your chin a bit and you think, yeah, why do we do things like this? And that is a really, really important thing. And COVID offers almost an opportunity to draw a bit of a line under the sand, because we do need to do things differently. And we recognize that there are things that all schools have jettisoned. Some of those things shouldn't come back.
Thank you, Gareth. Kate.
Well, I'm going to tread a bit carefully with this one, because I got myself into some difficulty a few weeks ago when I rather carelessly used language to suggest that using the crisis as an opportunity to do things differently was something that we should do. But it's actually what we're being asked here, isn't it? What is the crisis teaching us about what actually we wouldn't want in the future and probably shouldn't have been tolerating in the present and in the recent past? And I think, you know, there are the day-to-day practices that we've heard about from Alison and from Gareth. I must say, incidentally, how much I'm enjoying listening to teachers, you know, like Alison and Gareth, talking about what it's like being a teacher. It reminds me of being at home with my mum and dad when I was a small girl. But I think there are obviously the day-to-day things that you can change in school. Why are we doing it like that? And then there are the really big strategic things that I'm thinking about, and in which I particularly welcome the input of NQTs. What is it telling us about the assessment regime? Is it right? Is it actually assessing children and young people in the way that we want? What is it about inspection and accountability? Is it inspecting the right things? Is it the right kind of process for spreading good practice and driving improvement? You know, what is it about the curriculum? Given the uncertainty that our children and young people are growing up into, have we got the right curriculum for the future that they're going to live through? Again, I seem to have got myself in some difficulty on Twitter with that one last night, but there you go. That politicians are there to stir it up and take what comes back. But I really want to hear from, I want to hear from everybody in the profession. I want to hear from parents. I want to hear from students, but I'm really keen to hear from NQTs, because as we're hearing from, you know, Gareth and Alison, you come with fresh eyes, and that's a tremendous asset, and something I think that is a really good thing that we can draw out of the really appalling crisis that we find ourselves in.
Oh, sorry, Becky, I was on mute. I do apologise.
Sorry, I was wondering if I was ready.
We're bound to have one Zoom mistake, and it had to be made, didn't it? So go on, Becky.
Yeah, I think that there have been a series of opportunities developing from the crisis. Obviously, my organisation has been very much focused on emergent gaps and the terrible problems, particularly for disadvantaged families, and we may come back to that, of course, in the discussion. But focusing on some of the opportunities, I mean, first of all, just recognition of the work and expertise of teachers. That's been one thing that the pandemic and the situation in the first lockdown has really precipitated, I think. And we, you know, I think that's really great for the profession to be recognised as professionals, as expert, that this is not a job that anyone can do. And I think there are benefits in that. I think then thinking about the opportunities in relation to new way of doing things that Gareth was mentioning, clearly remote learning is one point. You know, I think that we all know that the evidence on ed tech and remote learning is very mixed. It's also quite scant. This is why we did our rapid evidence assessment, because there was actually, you know, we just lack robust evidence in this field, but the EEF have done our best to support here, and there's some good messages in that guide. But clearly the door is now open to the development of further ed tech support and remote learning. We must build on good practice and share what's worked, think very carefully about CPD and development here. Nevertheless, without wanting to sort of precipitate stereotypes, this is something that younger, newer entrants to the profession often get to grips with more quickly sometimes than their older and more experienced peers. So when Alison was saying about some of the things that you can bring as NQTs, there may be some among you that have expertise in this regard and can help out in your schools here and sharing good practice. And new ways of doing things. And those, I think, also potentially offer flexibility for the future around curriculum and working practices that have really dogged schools, often wedded to very sort of inflexible ways of working that have precluded family-friendly sort of you know, shared working arrangements and so forth. So I think there may be some opportunities there. Then, of course, there are new innovations that we've been forced to think about, but genuinely are potentially productive practices going forward. One of the things that the EEF is very heavily involved with at the moment, again, based on the evidence that we drew together about effective methods to support young people through the pandemic, is tutoring, one-to-one and small group tuition. And we're involved with the national tutoring programme that is now being rolled out, and many of you will be aware of. And that again is an evidence-based approach which may have benefit for the future, developing that high quality tutoring offer to support kids who've fallen behind in particular areas. And finally, I guess that brings me on to a broader issue, which is highlighting inequality. It's really struck me when we struggle with the discussions on exams this year and how we can make them fair in the time of a pandemic, when, you know, certain kids in certain parts of the country will have struggled either to access remote learning or have been had more learning loss because of higher rates of the virus in different parts of the country, which really illuminates the fact that we have inequality right across the education system every year. If we think about kids in the private school system, the average privately educated child is 3 times better funded than a state school kid, but they take the same exams and then go through the same admissions systems to further and higher education and so forth. So I think that some of the inequalities and the interests in inequality that are highlighted by the pandemic actually are really good aids for us to be thinking more broadly about equity in the education system and how we can do better.
Thanks, Becky. Very good discussion, really. A very good generic discussion there around the pressures and difficulties facing NQTs and some ideas in the current COVID-19 crisis. I'm going to try and move the discussion slightly away. And I don't think I've ever been to an NQT event that hasn't covered the next question. So it's inevitable and it's coming up, and it's around developing behaviour management practices. If an NQT is finding it difficult to develop their practice in classroom management, behaviour management, any ideas from the panel about how they can develop that practice and get the support they need? I'm going to start with Gareth this time.
Okay, so I think the important thing, in a sense, it links to a theme, doesn't it, about not being on your own. A lot of I think that when you're a teacher, I mean, perhaps even before you start to become a teacher, the one of the things you worry about is, how will I control the difficult classes? I think that is something that is almost uniform as a thought for teachers. How will I deal with those classes that are really, and then you get some of them. You do. There are difficult children. There are issues that you may have. I mean, there are plenty of fantastic, brilliant children, by the way, but there will be difficult experiences there. And what's important to recognize is that everybody goes through that at all levels of careers. That, you know, you may well think you've got it made and you've not had this for a long time, and then someone comes along who's a challenge. And I remember in my first year as an NQT, head teacher, is a fantastic head teacher at the school that I taught at. There was a child that, for whatever reason, he could not cope with it. You could almost see that on his face. I've not had to deal with this for 30 years. Oh my gosh, you know, how am I going to deal with this? And I think the part of the point is that I hope what he did, just as you would do, is talk to other colleagues, use those networks of support. If you feel uncomfortable about that because you're the only NQT in the school, and you're worried about the fact that that might mean that they're judging you as not being capable, well, it's highly likely that they won't. But if you are really concerned about that anyway, use the union, use other networks of support, talk to other colleagues, students that were on your course about the experiences that they've had as well. Look for networks of support. The critical thing about all of this is not to stew and to, you know, worry about this unnecessarily. This will happen. You will have difficulties, but you will also get through them. And that's really, really important to understand.
Thanks, Gareth. Becky?
I think I must defer to Gareth and Alison here in terms of their expertise. You know, I'm not a trained teacher, so I have not, I may have had slightly arrogant students to have to deal with as a university lecturer, but that's rather a different business. I think the only helpful point that I can make on top of Gareth's wise words about looking for support are to also reiterate his point to remember that this doesn't reflect badly on you if you have those difficulties. We all, however high we are in our profession, think about, you know, how we've appeared, angst about, you know, a silly comment we made or a critical comment that was made to us, and whether this reflects on ourselves. Try to get past it, remember it happens to everybody, and reach out for advice. And I think the final point, again, in taking this beyond behaviour, because it's not all about behaviour, again, reach out to those other organisations that offer resources and guidance to you, whether that's at, you know, the organisations we're representing today or more broadly.
Thanks, Becky. Alison?
Okay, so this is a big one, isn't it? I think the most, well, there's several things. The first is that you need to respect yourself, because if you want other people to respect you, you need to respect yourself. So recognize that every day is a new day. And when you are a teacher, children are incredibly forgiving. So when you start the next day, yesterday might have been it might have been something that's driven you to drink the night before, but then you start the next morning and you start with a fresh day, and the children start on a fresh day with you. Make sure that you're well organized, make sure that you're calm, and that you are always fair, because fairness is one of the things that youngsters absolutely have a kind of an extra sort of sensory, a kind of awareness of. So never suggest that you're going to do something you can't follow through on. Don't issue empty threats. You know, make sure that you are calm, consistent, fair, well prepared. And it also helps if you know what you're talking about. So it also helps if, when you're teaching something, you actually know the subject and you know what it is that you're going to be talking about in such a way that you're not terrified that if someone asks you a question, they're going to catch you out. And if you are teaching something, maybe you're doing a cover lesson, or maybe you're, again, in these times that could be very likely. If you're teaching something that's not your area of expertise, then it's okay to be quite open about these things. I think, again, children and young people absolutely spot authenticity. So all of those things really count. Then when it comes to the class that you dread teaching and you've tried all these things and they've it still feels like you're being bullied on scale, then look for advice. So there are videos that you can look at. For example, there are videos by people like Doug Lemov, Tom Bennett, Amy Forrester, Paul Dix. You can find all of these on the Chartered College Hub site that I was talking about. They give you strategies about setting routines, making sure that you can minimize distractions, things like having additional resources at your fingertips. So the typical thing would be, I haven't got a pencil, I haven't got a pen, you know, those kind of, well, just make sure you've just calmly got one. And then there's something that is within all of this, that is about not choosing to have a kind of one-on-one battle with a child in front of everybody else. Because when you've got an audience, the rest of the audience, well, they can sit back and think, oh, here we go. And if they know that you're likely to do that, they will set that up so that it will happen because it's entertaining. And in fact, the more that you start to sort of lose it, the more entertaining it is. So just don't get yourself into that situation at all. If someone is winding you up, then do your absolute level best to think, I am not going to respond to this. I am not going to let you provide the entertainment that everybody seems to want. And then on top of all of that, of course, all the things that has just been said by Becky, you know, do ask for advice. And there's something about, it looks invisible. This is what's so tricky. And this is why students often complain, well, they never taught me about this when I was at university, or my mentors, because it looks invisible. I remember as an NQT with a particular class that I found incredibly challenging, that the head of the department only had to put her face in the window of the door of my classroom and the whole class would go shtum. And I'd think, well, what has she done? I mean, she's not even good looking. How has this happened? And the reality is it's kind of status that's built up over time. And it is invisible, but sooner or later, you will be one of those people that is providing that invisible behavior management yourself. And as I say, be kind to yourself along the way.
Thanks, Alison. Kate, I know, would you like to add anything to the comments made?
These are really useful tips for managing rowdy behaviour in the House of Commons, which I am hanging on to. And obviously, like Becky, I'm not a trained teacher. I've found it very interesting to listen to Gareth's and Alison's answers. I did just want to kind of ask a question, perhaps, rather than answer that one, which is, in a class where there's poor behaviour, struggle to control, there are kids sitting there who are themselves anxious, frightened, wish all this would go away. There may be the quiet kids whose behaviour problem is not that they're challenging and confrontational, it's that they're withdrawn and not confidently engaging with you. So I'm just really interested, perhaps not right now, Phil, as obviously there are lots of questions to go through, but it might be something at some point in answering the questions that Alison and Gareth in particular might want to pick up too.
Thanks, Kate, and a very, very pertinent observation there, to be honest. I mean, as another practitioner on the panel, this is my only contribution, and hopefully a very practical one, is one of the key CPD elements of behaviour management, and this works especially in secondary settings, is I would ask to go and observe that class you're struggling with in other settings where another practitioner is dealing with them and teaching them, especially if that practitioner's got a handle on them. That's where you'll get the better tips. Far more difficult in a primary setting, but you can. I think the alternative in a primary setting that I've been involved with before is to get a more experienced practitioner come and take your class for 1 or 2 lessons, so you can sit and observe different techniques about behaviour management. And really, always remember about behaviour management, it is about student engagement. It is about engaging the students is actually your best behaviour management tool than over and above anything else. And like I said, that is going to be my only sort of practical contribution to the discussion today. I'm going to move on to the next question, which is specifically for Kate, but I am going to give other panelists an opportunity to answer it differently. Kate, your shadow spokesman for education in England, how would Labour do things differently?
What an enormous question. And the question I was asked the other day, which is my first answer to this, is what would you do on your first day in the job? And I said, well, I think that I'd better sit down with the people who really know what needs to be done, the professionals, the stakeholders, the experts like Becky, who have done the research and can really help me to prioritize what the evidence is telling us about what works most effectively. I'd like to sit down with the learners, the children and young people and their parents. I think it's really interesting to be hearing from what the wider community is wanting of our schools and our education system too. Just to reassure you, I'm doing that now during the period in the run up to the next Labour government. But I think on the first, this isn't meant to be a shallow or a trite remark. I think that first day in the role, there's a symbolic importance to be there listening, and listening particularly to teachers. I mean, you are the absolute heart of the success of our education system. And although you can't do it all on your own, you can't address socioeconomic injustice or poverty or disadvantage all on your own. If I'm not listening to the teaching profession as the Secretary of State for Education, then I'm doing something very, very wrong. And I sort of tried to set out, Phil, I mean, there isn't a lot of time this morning, but I tried to set out some of the key values and principles in my very short opening remarks. I do want education to be world class. I do think our children deserve the best, and we want them to reach the highest standards that they're capable of. I do want that curriculum to prepare them for life, for their future studies, their future careers. That's important for our country as a whole, as well as for them as individuals. But I also want their learning to be enriching and enjoyable, and I want that to be their experience of learning all through life. And that doesn't always happen if the experience in school hasn't been a good one. People can be very frightened off learning if their school experience is not happy. I want it to be inclusive. I worry a lot about the kids that don't really get noticed so much or don't get the best out of the education system. Not always or by any means because teachers don't want them to, but because structures and funding and routines get in the way. Children with special educational needs and disabilities. Very interesting conversations I'm having at the moment with the Black curriculum campaigners. How do we make our school experience one where they feel their identity is respected and celebrated at every point in the curriculum, not just teaching some Black history at some point in the history syllabus. I think it's really important that school is a place where children feel safe and confident about their own identity, their sexual identity, that they also have their privacy and their autonomy respected, that, you know, children are able to have areas where they say, I don't want to discuss that in that way. That's personal and private to me. And you know, you are allowed to have some of that own space in our education system too. And then there are all the processes and systems that, you know, I want to get stuck into: the curriculum, the inspection regime, our exams and assessments process, which, you know, teachers again and again tell me is so frustrating. It's all about teaching to the test and, you know, cramming in the facts, when children really, in my thinking, for the kind of world we're going into, you know, what you really want them to be doing, and I know you do this as professionals, is enabling them to interrogate information, to ask questions, to work collaboratively, to problem solve. So huge, I mean, I could go on about this for hours and hours, Phil, if you'd let me. And I hope you will come back and go on at me for hours and hours over the next 3 or 4 years as I'm preparing to move into sanctuary buildings, I hope, by 2024. But it's just such an exciting brief, I think, to really reimagine an education system that genuinely meets the needs of the future. And I very much want to do that in partnership with you who are in the front line, because you have so much to tell and teach me, and I want to hear from you.
Okay, and thanks. And I'm sure the NASUWT will be taking up that offer, Kate. I'm going to slightly change the emphasis, same sort of question, but we are pressed for time here. I'm going to give the other panelists an opportunity. If they had an opportunity to change one thing in the education system, what would it be and why? Just a very quick one. Alison.
So I would increase the status of the teaching profession. And that's essentially what the Chartered College of Teaching is all about. We're really keen to help wider society appreciate the expertise, the lifelong learning of what it means to be a teacher. And I would love teachers to consider studying to become chartered. So my ambition would be that every teacher joins the NASUWT, but also joins the Chartered College of Teaching, and together builds that professional career that they deserve. Thank you.
Thank you, Alison. Becky?
Sorry, unmute. Again, it's about teaching. It's about you guys. The evidence shows that the quality of the teacher is the most important thing, both in supporting pupil progress and doubly so for kids from disadvantaged backgrounds. And the trouble is that at present we have diversity about, rates into the profession, access to schools, access to qualified teachers in, for example, physics and maths in different parts of the country. So if there's one thing I would do, it would be supporting teaching quality to be equalised across the system. And I guess being cheeky and saying supporting that, particularly in the early years, to make sure that kids get the best start in life, and equalising some of those inequalities that kids bring into school with them would be my double element there.
Okay, thanks very much, Becky. I'm going to broaden it slightly out for Gareth, and you can answer the same question, but also we need to have a little plug for the NASUWT. So he's also going to tell participants why they should remain in the NASUWT and be active in the NASUWT in answering this question.
Okay, so I mean, first of all, I could come up with a very long list of things. I know you said one initially, didn't you? But we could come up with a very long list of things. And of course, the things that colleagues have already spoken about the importance of teaching and so on, absolutely critical. We need to re-professionalize the teaching profession, and for the profession to feel as like the professionals, not like they're being done down to, as can often happen at the moment. Not always, but can often happen. But I do think, and this is sort of an odd thing perhaps for a teaching union to talk about, but a lot of the issues that we talk about to do with disadvantage and so on are to do with child poverty, are to do with housing, those kind of issues. So if I was to have a magic wand and to sort out the education system, funnily enough, I might not do anything initially with the education system. I might ensure that child poverty is sorted out, that housing is good, so that children feel safe and secure at home, that they have places where that they can study when they're doing their homework, that they feel valued within their homes, and then they can come into the school and also hopefully feel valued there. It won't sort out everything, of course, we get that, but it would help with a lot of those things. Now, why should you join the NASUWT? Because it is the union for teachers, by teachers, run by teachers. You've already heard about some of this today. Phil, who is our senior vice president, is a practicing teacher. Our president is a practicing teacher. These are people that know teaching inside out, really care and are passionate about teaching, and that there are these networks throughout the country, local associations, there are regional conferences, there are national conferences where we're talking about the issues that matter to you. So part of this is about the issues that matter, that there are plenty of opportunities to talk about those issues, to discuss them, to meet people who are like you, to meet people who are not like you as well, because that's really important as well too, isn't it? We don't want to meet people who are all the same as us, but also critically that we've got your back. And because we understand teachers, because we only deal with teachers, that's one thing of our unique selling points here, is we've got your back. We understand what the issues are, so that if there are problems for you, we know how to deal with them. We've got the expertise. We've been doing it for 100 years in one guise or another. So we really do know how to do these things. And so it's really important that when you're a member of this union, you recognize that this isn't about a union that's an organization that's for you. You're a part of that. I think that's really exciting. It's a community. Unions were formed in order for people to get together to solve solutions. And we at the NASUWT really see that we want to all get together and solve those solutions. So the NASUWT is about more than that. I could talk about the benefits and the services that we offer. I could talk about, the range of different things that are out there, but I think it's really important to understand, if you like, almost what are the principles behind the NASUWT. And the major principle is that we think of ourselves as a community, almost as a family, really, an organization that's there to support each other, to develop each other, to understand the policies, and then to relate them to government. And as you can imagine, we're talking to government, we're talking to policymakers all the time about those issues on your behalf.
Thank you, Gareth. And we're going to finish off with a final question, which I think in the context of what we've discussed today is a very important question. And literally, I think each panelist can have about a minute each, you'd be pleased to know. But what's the panel's advice on staying positive during the current situation as you're a new entrant into this great profession? And I'm going to start with Becky.
I think for me, it's repeating some of those points that I made about opportunities from the pandemic. I think recognition of teaching, the importance of the job that teachers do, the point that this is a great profession and that we professionalise throughout our careers, has been recognised both by the public and increasingly by government too, as expressed by the early career framework, the new suite of qualifications that are being refurbished to support professional careers and so forth. And that is an opportunity, and it is, I think, an upbeat note on which to finish.
Okay, thanks for that, Becky. Staying positive, Alison?
Absolutely. So I'm going to give you a quote from Tim Brighouse, who works with a teacher who says this: "I have come to the frightening conclusion I am the decisive element in the classroom. It is my personal approach that creates the climate. It is my daily mood that makes the weather. As a teacher, I possess tremendous power to make a child's life miserable or joyous. I can be a tool of torture or an instrument of inspiration. I can humiliate or humour, hurt or heal. In all situations, it is my response that decides whether a crisis will be escalated or de-escalated, a child humanised or dehumanised." So you really do make the weather. In your classroom, your children don't look at you and think, oh, she's only been teaching for a couple of months. They're in your climate that you create. So make sure that's a sunny climate and do everything you can to look after yourself.
Thanks, Alison. Kate?
I think I'd echo everything that Becky and Alison have said. And I think I would also say that after this COVID crisis, you will have started your career in the most challenging circumstances that anybody in any profession actually has had to face in decades and generations, probably not since the Second World War. And the skill, the confidence, the resilience, the flexibility that will mean you will bring to the whole of the rest of your careers will be something exceptional. It's horrible while we're going through this. It's absolutely horrific for you, for your families, for the kids you're teaching, for everyone around us in our communities. But afterwards, you as teachers will have something so extra special that you will have drawn from this experience that we will all benefit from. And that makes me feel incredibly excited, positive, and also determined to give you all the support and recognition that I can while you are going through this experience now. But you are the building blocks for the future. And that makes me very, very positive and excited that when we come through this crisis, we'll come through it in a better place than when we went in.
Thanks, Kate. And I hope Gareth can make the final comments and can continue the positive tones of the last few comments. Gareth.
I'll try my best. I mean, I think the most important thing, I mean, in a way, I almost feel like quoting Bing Crosby, you've got to accentuate the positive and eliminate the negative. But I think the point about this is that you've got to make sure that it's a difficult year, that there are lots of things going on, you're working really hard. So you've got to find those little moments that you really enjoy. You've got to make sure that you do still treat yourself. You've got to almost, if you like, find the joy in small things sometimes. Sorry, that microphone fell out. Got to find the joy in small things. That might be what you have to do sometimes. Sometimes you might have to count off the days till the next, the end of the weekend or to Christmas or whatever, but the important thing is that I think work with colleagues to understand that you're not on your own. I know that I keep saying this, but this is really important. And to look after yourselves, as Alison said earlier, that is absolutely critical with this, to make sure that you're doing all the things that you can do to to look after yourself, to think about yourself, to make sure that you're looking after the number one for yourself, which is you.
Thanks, Gareth. And that brings a close to the first part of the day. NQT colleagues have got other workshops that I think are starting at 11 o'clock. I hope they're as enjoyable, as interesting as this discussion that we've had this morning. And I think my final job is to say a big thank you to Alison, to Becky, Kate and Gareth for their time on a Saturday morning. And I hope it has been as an interesting experience as it has for me. And thank you very much from the NASUWT and from our NQT members who've been listening to you this morning. And enjoy the rest of the day, everybody. Thank you.